No Place Like Oz, Chapter 13. The peculiar sight of Aunt Em and Uncle Henry, dressed in some of the finest clothes in Oz, greeted me in the great drawing room of the palace. They were draped in colorful silks and satins, and their colors were so high that they couldn't turn their heads. It wasn't just their clothes that had been gussied up either. Apparently, someone had seen to fit to style their hairdos according to the latest Oz fashions. Uncle Henry's hair had been swept up into a funny little triangle, and his beard was trimmed into a sharp point. Aunt Em's hair, freshly coiffed in a gigantic updo, had been dyed a ridiculous lime shade with emerald combs holding it tightly in place. Even poor Toto hadn't been spared. He looked like a giant black puffball, his fur blown out so that he was twice his normal size. The greatest indignity of all was that they had tied a bright green ribbon around his neck. I couldn't help but giggle at the sight. They looked wonderful by Oz standards, of course, but I wasn't used to seeing Uncle Henry out of his overalls or Aunt Em out of her gray muslin frock. They all glared at me. Toto snarled. Ozma entered the sitting room with a moment after me. "My, don't you look wonderful?" she exclaimed at the sight of them. "Like real members of the court." They glared at her, too. This was as mad as I'd seen them since the time that the Shiflets down the way had let the cows loose and they trampled Aunt Em's prize petunias. I clasped my hands together, quickly changing the subject. "I have something wonderful to tell you," I gushed, hoping to sweep them up in my excitement. "You brought me a pair of coveralls and some old work boots?" Uncle Henry asked. I shook my head, grinning from ear to ear. "Better. Princess Ozma has invited the Lion and the Tin Man to come visit us in the palace tomorrow." Ozma had informed me of the plan after we left the maze, when we were heading back to the castle. She sent word to the Lion and the Tin Woodman that I was back as soon as she heard herself, and the Sawhorse was already on his way to fetch them. Tomorrow they would be here. We would all be together again, just like before. It was all more perfect than I could have imagined. It was so perfect that, for a minute, I let myself forget that Glinda was missing. There was no use fretting about it now, anyway. When my friends arrived, we'd be able to put our heads together and try to figure out what had happened to her. In the meantime, I didn't see the harm in enjoying myself. I may have shoved the thought of home conveniently from my mind for now, but Uncle Henry and Aunt Em weren't going to let me forget it. They struggled to look at each other over the folds of their enormous clothes. "That's a very lovely offer from Miss Ozma," Uncle Henry said carefully, "but this has gone on long enough. It's time we find your friend Glinda and head back home." At the name Glinda, Ozma turned sharply towards me. "Glinda?" she asked. For a briefest of instants, I thought that I saw fire behind her green eyes. "Well," I said, thinking fast, "Uncle Henry and Aunt Em do want to go home, and Glinda was the one who sent me home last time, so it's high time that we go back to the farm," Uncle Henry said, nearly shouting. Aunt Em put a calming hand on his shoulder, but it only got him more worked up. He tugged at his collar. "Enough of this royal bullpucky," he barked. Then, noticing that Ozma was still standing right there, he got even more flustered. "Beg your pardon, your royal Ozma." The princess shook her head kindly, as if she would never think of being offended. As usual, Aunt Em was slightly more diplomatic than Henry. Grasping my hand, she said, "I'm just not sure this is the right place for us, Dorothy. We're not cut out for palaces and fancy frocks like these. The only princess I ever knew before this was the Sunflower Princess at the State Fair, and she's not really a real princess at all if you think about it." No, I thought, she most certainly was not. "I know it all seems silly to you, Dorothy," she went on, "but the farm is all your uncle and I have. What do you suppose the poor animals are eating?" Ozma stepped in. "Time flies differently here in Oz than it does back in your world," she explained to my aunt and uncle patiently, even though it had already been explained to them. "It's more likely your animals haven't even noticed you're gone." "I don't," Uncle Henry started, but he's old-fashioned enough that when a princess talks to him, he listens. And at this moment, Ozma was acting every bit like a princess. I was starting to see that she could turn it on and off, just like that. "You certainly wouldn't want Dorothy to miss seeing her old companions, wouldn't you? And I know that the Tin Woodman and the Lion have been so looking forward to meeting you, too. Please just stay for tomorrow's dinner." "And then?" Uncle Henry asked. Ozma smiled kindly. "Well," she said, "I'm afraid Glinda can't help you. She's been missing for some time now, and I've already searched the kingdom high and low for her." She glanced at me. "I'm sure she's safe. Nothing can possibly harm a witch as powerful as she is. But wherever she is, she's hidden herself well." Ozma had been so funny and open and warm, nothing like what I had imagined. I'd heeded the Scarecrow's warnings not to tell her about the shoes, or to ask directly about Glinda, and I'd started to mostly dismiss the idea that she could have done anything to her. Now I was unsure again. I had the strongest feeling she was lying to me. I'm not experienced with the type of magic it would take you to send you back to Kansas Land, Ozma continued. Her warm, smooth voice had just enough of a tone of authority to silence my aunt and uncle into submission, for now. But after tomorrow, I'll begin looking into ways to send all of you back. I'm sure I can find something. Uncle Henry and Aunt Em were nodding in resigned agreement, but I was surprised to feel my entire body shaking with anger, my fists clenched so tightly they hurt. "No!" I shouted. The marble floors magnified the sound of my voice several times over, but I didn't care. "No, no, no!" Aunt Em and Uncle Henry's jaws both dropped in astonishment. They'd seen me lose my temper before, of course, but never like this. Even Ozma turned and looked at me like she was seeing me for the first time. I was surprised at myself, even. It wasn't like me to behave like this. I just didn't care. "I'm not going back there," I said. "Not now, not tomorrow, and not ever. I belong here. We belong here. I'm not making the same mistake twice. You can go home without me if you want, but I'm not leaving." Aunt Em's eyes welled with tears, and even Uncle Henry was speechless. Ozma took me by the hand. "It's been a long day for all of us. Even you," she said. "We'll talk about this again tomorrow. I'm sure we can work something out when our heads are cooler." Uncle Henry and Aunt Em stared as Ozma led me out of the parlor. Toto hesitated for a second, like he was unsure whose side he was supposed to be on. But by the time Ozma and I were climbing the grand staircases toward her private chambers, he was nipping at my heels. The princess looked at me in concern. "Dorothy," she said, "what was that about?" Although I was still surprised at how strong my reaction had been, it didn't change what I had said. "I'm not going back there," I said, summoning every bit of Kansas grit I had. "They can't make me." "But I thought you loved Kansas," she said, furrowing her brow in confusion. "You know, your story is famous here in Oz. We tell it all the time. And in the story we tell, the important part is that you wanted to go home. You could have stayed here, but you wanted to go back to Kansas. You would have done anything to get back here. Is that story wrong?" My face flushed in shame. "It's just—" I started. "No, the story isn't wrong. I did want to go home. I missed it. But once I was there, nothing was the way I remembered it. Once you've seen a place like Oz, nowhere else is the same again. How could it be?" "Your aunt and uncle will come around," Ozma said with a quiet confidence as we reached the top of the steps and turned down a long, dim hall that was carpeted in green velvet. She clasped my hand tightly in hers. "I'm sure of it. But for now, I think I have just the right thing to cheer you up." The room was full of lights. Chandeliers sparkled from the ceiling, and little luminescent orbs drifted around the room. The space was stuffed with plush velvet pillows and chairs and brocade lounges, and against the far wall several floor-to-ceiling mirrors set in elaborate gilt frames. The air was fragrant with Ozma's perfume, bergamot, and sandalwood, and something else I couldn't place. "Is this your bedroom?" I asked in awe, looking around the room in search for a bed. Did she sleep in a divan? Or maybe fairies didn't need sleep at all. Ozma giggled. "No, silly," she said. "It's my closet." My closet back home could barely fit a single coat hanger, much less all this furniture. But if it was a closet, there was something strange about it, even stranger than a bedroom with no bed. Where are the clothes? Ozma smiled mischievously. Then she closed her eyes and moved her hand in the air like she was playing an invisible harp. The lights dimmed and the air grew heavier, like we were standing in a pool of warm water. Goosebumps crept over my skin. It was magic. Real magic. As she moved her hands through the air, plucking unseen strings, I felt a rush of energy coursing through my body, a feeling that reminded me of the shoes. Catching a glimpse of myself in the mirror, I saw that she was working magic on me, on us. Our hair changed first. Mine began weaving itself into a complex series of braids, while hers whirled itself up into an elegantly messy shignon. Next, my clothes tangled against my skin. I felt buzzy all over as my dress became shorter and more fitted, glistening with silver embroidery across the chest. Sparkling bracelets appeared on my wrists, and a glittering necklace materialized around my neck. I stared at myself in a mirror. "It's beautiful," I said, truly shocked. I'd never believed I could look this alive before. I didn't think I could ever back in Kansas. The gray sky and gray plains washed everything out eventually. I look beautiful. Something funny happened when I was doing the spell, though. I tried to give you new shoes. It didn't work. I looked down at my feet. The red heels I'd gotten for my birthday were still there. They looked more beautiful than ever with this stunning dress. I shrugged. I guess it's 'cause they're already perfect, I said guiltily, hoping Ozma would buy it. She smiled. They are beautiful, she said. Where did you get them? Birthday present. I turned around, admiring my reflection. I couldn't believe it was even me. Was it really just yesterday morning that I had been hauling pig slop across the field? I felt like someone brand new, someone better than I'd been before, someone who belonged here, not there. Ozma was still looking at my shoes. Who gave them to you? She asked. My friend Mitzi Blair, I said quickly. I see, Ozma said with a tight smile. Well, your friend Mitzi has wonderful taste. She knew something in my story wasn't right, but I could tell exactly what she couldn't tell exactly what she did know. Could she tell that the shoes had come from Glinda? What would happen if she figured out I was lying? And, finally, why had the Scarecrow asked me to hide the truth in the first place? I thought about telling her everything right there. She had been so nice so far, and I found it hard to believe that she was anything other than what she was presenting herself as. That my shoes were burning on my feet and their heat spread through my whole body. No, they seemed to be saying, so I followed the Scarecrow's advice and kept my mouth shut. Can you teach me? I asked instead. Teach you? Ozma asked. To do this. I gestured at my clothes. To do magic? Ozma looked at me long and hard, searching me like I was a puzzle to be worked out. Finally, she shook her head. No, she said softly. I can't. Magic is dangerous. Even for those of us who are native to Oz, it's dangerous. For people who aren't from here, it can be too much to handle. It can do strange things to you. Strange things like what? I was annoyed. How did Ozma know what I could handle? How did she know anything about people from my world, when I was the first that she had ever met? It can twist you, Ozma said, and then as she was reading my thoughts, You know, Dorothy, you're not the first visitor to come here from the outside world. The wizard wasn't the first either. There have been others over the years. Who? I asked. She just shook her head, like the story was too sad to tell, and then she brightened and flung herself onto one of her lounges. She threw her feet up, took off her crown, and dropped it carelessly on the floor. It gets heavy, she explained. It all gets heavy. The crown, the scepter, this big empty palace. It's so much responsibility. It's so lonely. I'm just happy you're here. I'm happy I'm here too, I said. But I didn't like the way she had changed the subject so quickly. Who were the others who had came before me? What had happened to them? What had happened to Glinda? And what was Ozma keeping from me? I've tried, Ozma said. Really, I have. At first I thought Jellia and I could be the greatest friends, but she's so focused on the fact that I'm the princess and that she's my servant. I told her to stop calling me Miss and Your Highness, and that I didn't care if she brushed my hair and brought me my breakfast in the morning. She wouldn't listen. After that, I invited the patchwork girl to come to stay with me for a while. She's so much fun. She's stuffed, like the Scarecrow, but with cotton instead of straw, you know. Which might be one reason for the lack of common sense and conversational skills. You can only keep up with someone like her for so long before it wears you down. But now you're here, Dorothy. It's like I finally found someone who I have something in common with. I just wish you didn't have to go home. I'm not going home, I said firmly. Ozma twisted her lips and thought. You really don't want to, do you? She said. I don't want to, and I'm not going to, I said. My mind was made up. I was staying here, in Oz, in the palace, no matter what. Well, the princess said after a bit, we'll just have to make sure your aunt and uncle understand then, won't we? She stood up and faced me. She took my hands in hers. I wanted to trust her. I wanted to be your friend, but as I looked back into her big glittering eyes, she averted her gaze for just the briefest moment, and I knew that she was hiding something from me. She said we were friends, and I believed her, but something gnawed at me, and it wasn't just Glinda, or the Scarecrow's warnings. The bedroom that Jellia escorted me after dinner was everything I had dreamed. It was 3 times as big as my room back in Kansas, with a panoramic window that looked out over the shimmering emerald skyline. There was a huge vanity and a jewelry box overflowing of earrings and bracelets and necklace, any one of which I was sure would have cost more than Uncle Henry earned in a year back in Kansas. The ebony wardrobe in the corner was stuffed with any kind of gown I could imagine, not to mention more than a few that I never would have been able to dream up on my own. This is what I had wanted. Sitting alone in a field back in Kansas, covered in pig slop, with Miss Millicent on my lap. I had made a wish without even realizing it, and the wish had come true. It was too good to be true, though. As I stood in front of the open wardrobe, wondering which dress to try on first, I had an itchy feeling in the back of my head that was telling me Ozma knew me too well. Like she was giving me all this because she knew it was what I wanted, and she thought if she kept me happy, I wouldn't question her. She had seemed so adamant when I asked her to teach me magic. Adamant and a little sad. Like it was exactly what she'd been afraid of. And she'd certainly been interested in my shoes. Of course the shoes were magic. I had already figured that out. Uh, they were more than just a key that to unlock the door to Oz for me. The way they've been impossible to take off my feet for the scarecrow. The strange feelings that come from them all along my journey. All of that had suggested that they could do more than I knew. And of course, there was the way they seemed to help me fight off the screaming trees in the forest. Maybe I was a little afraid of them. But Glinda had sent them to me to bring me here. I was certain of it. And really, it seemed ridiculous that Ozma should be so against me doing magic. This was the land of Oz. There was magic in the earth, in the air. At the same time, it seemed obvious that she had figured out that there was more to the shoes than I was telling. I was fairly certain she knew at least a part of the truth. If she really didn't want me to do magic, why hadn't she been taking them away from me? What if she knew she couldn't? What if she was afraid of them too? What if my shoes were the key to finding Glinda? It all made a certain upside-down sense. Last time I'd been at Oz, I had the power in my silver shoes all along, and I hadn't even realized it. It would be incredibly stupid to make the same mistake twice. So I sat down on the edge of my bed and tried to call for the sorceress. I knocked my heels together. I squeezed my eyes shut and tried to conjure her kind, motherly spirit. I pictured her smiling, impossibly beautiful face. Something was happening. I could feel the red shoes trying as hard as I was. They constricted on my feet. They burned and tingled, glowing with energy. A few times I even felt like I was getting somewhere. I could feel the good witch's presence filling the room. Once I even thought I smelled her perfume, but no matter what I did, she didn't appear. I could feel the magic inside myself. I could practically see it sparkling from my fingertips as I waved them through the air, trying to bring her forth. Still nothing. Maybe it was just that I needed to start with something smaller. I walked to the vanity, sat down, and looked at myself. I examined my face closely. I thought about what Ozma had done earlier that day, about the way she had woven her fingers through the air, and changed my hair and clothes, and I wondered if I could do the same. So I closed my eyes. And I know it sounds strange of me. I didn't even know where it came from. I know, but I imagined myself as a giant tree standing in the center of the road of yellow brick, with roots that spread out from my feet and pushed deep into the core of Oz, drawing up magic like it was water. I imagined that Oz was feeding me. That was sort of what my shoes had felt like in the road of yellow brick, like the roots of a tree that connected me to Oz. I could feel it working. I could feel the power filling my body, and the more I did it, the hungrier it made me. I felt more alive than I ever had. I felt like I could do anything. But I was going to start small. I squeezed my eyes, touched my hair, and imagined the magic working on it. I imagined it changing colors, flipping through all the different possibilities the rainbow had to offer, until I landed on the most beautiful color I could. Pink. The pink of a sunset. The pink of Glinda's dress. And when I saw myself staring back from the mirror, a lock of hair tumbled across my forehead, and it was even pinker than I had hoped. I had done it. I had performed real magic. If I could change the color of my hair, what else could I do? Well, I had the whole night to find out, didn't I? Once I started, I almost couldn't stop. Some things were beyond me. I spent close to an hour trying to make myself fly, and the closest I could manage was something along the lines of a little bunny hop. That probably wasn't magic at all. I tried to make myself invisible, but all I accomplished was a distressing pallor in my complexion, and try as I might, I just couldn't bring back Glinda. However, there was plenty that I could do. Oh, just little things. Useless things, really. But little is relative when you're a girl from the prairie. I transformed a crumbled-up stocking into a little mouse that Toto chased furiously around the room before reacting with utter shock when it turned right back into a sock. He turned to glare reproachfully at me when he saw that I was doubled over with laughter in bed. I gave myself a lovely manicure. I made a fountain pen float across the room. I made a pair of earrings disappear from my jewelry box and reappear underneath my pillow. I didn't have to knock my heels to do any of it, but I found that if something was proving difficult, it did help. I turned the pink stripe in my hair green, then purple, and finally gold before I decided that I liked my hair just fine the way it was before, and I waved it away with just a thought. Once I started, it seemed like there was almost no end to it. All I had to do was think of something, and if I did hard enough, I could at least nudge it towards reality. With a little practice and a bit more imagination, I was certain I could be able to manage much more. I fell asleep still in my clothes, just as the sun was coming up, filled with happiness. I was in Oz, and in a few hours I would be reunited with my old friends the Lion and the Tin Woodman. I was in my own beautiful room in the Emerald Palace, and for now, no one, not even Aunt Em and Uncle Henry, could make me leave. Best of all, I had magic. It was mine, and Ozma herself could not take it away from me.